last, at last.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Ace on Music. I am joined as always by Mark and Sean.
Hello.
So, before we get into what I want to talk about this week, I just wanted to revisit this whole NFT thing for a moment, just because something kind of weird and exciting happened this week in the NFT world. One of the things that has sort of predicated the whole trust that the average person has found in the NFTs is this idea that it's part of the blockchain, and this blockchain is supposed to be so staggeringly difficult to, basically impossible to break into. And there was a piece of art, the one that sold for like $69 million. It was called Every Day's the First 5,000 Days. Anyway, there is a white hat hacker out of France who managed to actually replicate the NFT to some degree for that thing. And basically, when an NFT is created, it's called minting it. When you create an NFT, it's called minting it. He's created a process he calls sleep minting, where basically he has figured out how to go in, make an exact copy of the artwork using the original artist's wallet, and then he sends it off to wherever he wants it to go. And if this guy had just kept his mouth shut, if that was what his intent were, he could have, the average person would never be able to identify this as a forgery, only because you need to be a bit of a computer guy in order to see the differences. But I just think it's interesting that we've plunged just head over heels into this NFT world almost overnight, in my opinion. And now this guy is poking the beast, saying maybe this isn't as secure and wonderful as you all think. Had either of you two heard anything about this?
I have not. I'm kind of lost on the whole NFT thing myself. I try to keep up with all that, but it's just definitely got to dive into it and really focus on what they're talking about with that stuff, because that stuff gets very confusing to me.
Well, he's not really telling anybody how he did it. There have been all kinds of computer agencies that have been examining his code, trying to figure out what is going on and how he did it. But the one thing that they have determined is there is this another term I'm going to throw at you is called gas fees. And what gas fees are is the actual cost of dollars, real world money, in order to create an NFT. And the one thing that they have found about his forgeries is they take about 12 and a half times as much computing power to create as the original NFTs. So I think it's just interesting. I don't hear an awful lot about this in the news. And the ironic thing is there's a lot of legal bodies talking about this right now. And nobody's even sure whether this is actually illegal, what he has done. Because it's just, the science, once again, has gone charging way past any legislation involved here. So the only reason I bring this up is I just want people to stop and think for a minute. This is not necessarily the end-all, be-all, the new thing. This is something that can be, obviously he's figured out a way to make these things go very, very, very wrong. Now, he's doing it from a white hat kind of position. In other words, he's trying to show the flaws in the system in order so they can be repaired. But somebody with, shall we say, less than honorable intentions could be out there doing something, or may have already done something along these lines that we're not aware of yet. But anyway. So, this past week, we had the Oscars on Sunday, and the Grammys were back in February, and both of those programs had the worst ratings in their history. And in fact, there's serious conversations as to whether or not the Oscars will ever go on network television again, due to the pure number of low attendance to the watching.
Wow.
Now,
I heard that the Grammys audience shrunk by 20 million this year.
Yeah, and the Oscars dropped by almost 60% from last year, and last year was an all-time low. So this was actually the lowest amount of people watching the Oscars in the history of the Oscars. So it kind of made me stop and think for a minute that really maybe these shows are just, their time is done. These award shows are maybe over with. I mean, when I was a kid, that was a big deal when the Oscars came up or the Grammys, and everybody'd be talking about it, and who won what or who wore what or who played or that sort of thing. I went and asked my 11-year-old nephew the other day, and I said, was he excited about the Oscars or anything like that? And he didn't even know what the heck they were. He looked at me like I was a freak. Mm-hmm. So it got me to thinking that this all kind of started when the internet, the MTV came along, that changed everything, and then the internet came along, killed MTV. We're now more of a streaming society than we are a cable society, and I took a page out of the book of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. One of the biggest complaints that people who I talk to about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is that nobody really knows who's voting for these bands or how that happens, and the bottom line is the general public has nothing to say about this. Mm-hmm. So is it time that we get rid of these shows and replace them with something more internet-based that involves the actual public who's consuming the product rather than an old boys club who's patting each other on the back? I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
Well, I don't know if they need to be replaced. I think they just definitely need to be restructured. I mean, there's just a few things they need to do. I think they need to cut back on the awards and, and less politics, more live performances, I think, and just I don't know. Like, to me, MTV killed MTV back in the in the day, and just I don't know. The self-congratulatory is on the decline. I think for sure.
I agree. Well, Mark, you've spent a lot of your energy being in the film business, and this, the Oscars. Was that something? First of all, did you watch the Oscars this weekend?
I did. My closest friend was nominated.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a reason to watch.
I was up at the Staples Center the night before, having dinner and having a wonderful time with in that environment. And then also, it's worthy of mention that I was a voting member of the Grammys for 20 years, up until 2 years ago. So I've been in and around, and one of the reasons why I'm not a voting member right now is because they wanted to make sure that the people were still actively in the business. Mm-hmm. And so some of us old-timers who were not actively producing records anymore were removed. And so, lacking so many album credits over the last few years, that was it. And so now I'm not a voting member at this point. But I mean, I have, again, me, I always have different ideas. I think this stuff ebbs and flows. And I do think that I'm not even convinced that the internet killed MTV as much as MTV killed MTV. They, to me, it was a strategic decision that they made in order to start putting on shows. And so they left their core audience behind. And when those shows became tired, MTV became tired. And there was no way for them to regenerate what they had in the beginning. And I know some people with MTV who said that the videos themselves were not drawing the same audience, and they were not able to keep the recurring views that they had in the beginning. And so, they went to these other shows. But ultimately, MTV was not a television station related to music videos anymore. Mm-hmm. And so they had to compete against every other network out there, and they weren't producing shows of equal quality and so forth. So I'm a little bit on the fence with MTV, but I agree with Sean. I don't like the self-congratulatory stuff, but sometimes it's entertaining, and when it is, people come back.
Well, I think that you talked a lot about MTV, and I think that the one tip of the hat I'll give to MTV is that, it hasn't really been a factor for quite a while now, but when they were doing their big MTV awards, their shows were always so cool.
Amazing.
They had the best acts, they had the coolest categories, they had the greatest celebrities, and it was a pleasure to see those shows.
Because they were making fun of themselves.
They were. They
and that was the thing.
Were.
It was the best kiss, and it was all those awards that were actually very funny.
Yes.
And that was entertainment. But the idea that they were going to somehow manage to produce shows that similar to every other network. Now, I think it's probably a safe guess if it were, well, for me, it's my safe guess, so it's my guess. The influence that they had in when they created their own form of television, which was in some cases reality TV, and it's what you see in terms of Survivor and all those other shows. I think that their influence on how they influenced the other networks and for the next 20 years of television has been monstrous.
Absolutely. I mean, but I agree with you and Sean on the self-congratulatory kind of session being overworked and just over with. And when I look at the Oscars in the last even 10, maybe even 15 years, when I would see the list of nominees come out, which I don't even see hardly ever anymore. It used to be headline news whenever the list of the Academy Award nominees came out. But I looked at the list this year ahead of the broadcast, and there was literally about, I don't know how many films are nominated there in total, maybe 100 films or something over the course of all of the awards. And I think I'd heard of 3 of them. You know, I had not... And this is the same kind of thing that I see happening at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, there are so many artists who aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that deserve to be there because the body that votes them in has the final say. You know, a little while ago, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame added this feature where they had one spot that could be voted on by the fans. They listed about 10 bands that were eligible, and you could go to their website. Even if you go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they had a big display board right at the entrance showing who was winning and how many votes they had. And that was the first time that the general public, the music buying public, actually had any sort of say in what was going on there. And I think that, you know, the Oscars are suffering from the same thing. The Grammys are suffering from the same thing. It's a collective body. Like you said that you were a voting member of the Oscars.
No,
or I mean,
Grammys,
of the Grammys,
yeah.
excuse me. How did you get that? How did you get to become one 20-odd years ago when you became one?
I got it through the course of a ton of engineering and production credits.
So somebody in the industry who got asked to vote on other people in the industry.
Yeah, and now I think you have to ask yourself a fundamental question, and I think it's an important one. When you have the foreign press and the Golden Globes, or you have the Academy and the Academy Awards, or you have... Those are industry awards. And while,
for sure.
you know, and the idea that the public is going to be able to kind of jump on and have votes and send out notes to their friends and try to get more votes for people that they're fans of, I think that's great and populist and wonderful. But that's not what the core value of the shows are. And I think that the failure of the shows are the shows and the industry themselves. I'm not necessarily in favor of turning it into a popular vote contest. I mean, it's supposed to be representative of that, but you're right. I mean, I wasn't a hip hop guy, but the thing about the way the Grammys were structured is that I only had, I think, the equivalent of 9 votes, and I had to spread those votes across, 60 categories,
Right.
except for the fact that I and everybody in the Grammys got to vote on certain categories, such as Album of the Year and so forth. So we had 4 votes everybody could vote on, and the goal was so that record labels couldn't really stack all of their votes in certain areas. They were trying to create this kind of diversity so that I, as a folk music guy, was actually voting in the folk music categories, and I wasn't sitting in other categories where I really didn't have the knowledge of what was really going on. And so, there's a little bit of nuance here in the voting process, and the public is not always aware of that, and I get it. But, I mean, it's an industry award. I think the problem is that they haven't been entertaining.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And, I'll take a step back and kind of take a page out of what I was saying a moment ago. The thing about the shows in the past for me was you watched it because you had seen certain films. Like I remember the year that Silence of the Lambs was up for it. It was a film that I really enjoyed. I'd seen it several times in the theater, and so I was watching to cheer on this film that had affected me in big ways, and I wanted it to win. But I defy you walk down the street and ask 10 random people if they've seen all the films nominated in the best Oscar category this year, and I'll bet you most of them have never even heard of the titles, let alone seen them.
But that doesn't, again, the question is really whether it's a populist vote. If it's a populist vote, then Godzilla versus
King Kong
could have won everything, and yay, good for them. But ultimately, the idea was to figure out what was the best film from a video effects standpoint, and what was the best film from an editing standpoint. And so theoretically, it's the editors voting. People who know editing are voting, and it doesn't matter if it's the most popular. And I think you have to get to the root of what is the awards show about. Now, before we turned it into just a popular vote. And and I know the Grammys, they were creating same thing. They were kind of moving into the popular standpoint. They were getting rid of us old timers, trying to get some young blood in there. They're trying to do the same thing, but ultimately you want to know what is really the best movie. And Mank and the others, I mean, they're unbelievable movies. And so,
well, but okay, like music, movies are a very subjective thing. I mean, my favorite music may not be what you like, and it may not be what Sean likes. And so how can anybody say that this is better than this when it's, when you're going for like something like album of the year, where you have multiple genres being represented by one award, and is that album really better than that one? Like, what does it come down to?
I will tell you, I think that's the fairest point that there is that there were categories where it ultimately had to be popular because there were two, maybe album of the year should have been some folk music thing or a classical thing, because they were easily the greatest albums ever in their genre, but they never had a single shot at it.
Exactly.
But that was cool that was what was cool about the Grammys. We had a lot of collaboration. Look, Grammys started in the 50s, right? And you look at, go back to the 80s, Eric Clapton did some collaborations with bands, Tina Turner, Elton John did a crap load of them.
Well, actually, I think at this day and age, you're seeing more collaborations than you ever saw. I mean, if you go look at the top 40 right now, I don't know how many songs are, name of artist featuring this other artist and this other artist and whoever. It seems like collaboration is the name of the game.
Yeah.
But the bottom line to this entire discussion, though, that I think we all can agree on, is that whatever is going wrong, we can debate that. The bottom line is there is something going wrong, because nobody's watching these anymore. Nobody's entertained by these anymore, and they're going by the wayside.
Well, they just don't feel special like they used to.
So what can be done to fix that?
Well, I think you have. I still think you have to embrace the ebb and the flow of it. It's like when they say, "Well, the Super Bowl was the least watched in history," and then the next year it's the most watched in history. Because it has context, and there is context to this year. The truth is, if I were to ask you to name 10 movies this year, could you do it?
No, I couldn't.
And that's the point, which is this year was not a movie year. It sucked when it comes to movies. There was no theatrical action. None of us went out. And so, the fact that Netflix got the most nominations and other, you've got your Hulus and your this and that trying to put out feature films. Yeah, it's just not the same. You also have shifts in the movie business where United Artists getting into a brawl over Trolls and getting out of the business. This was a tumultuous year for movies, and people didn't go out. So, of course this is going to be the weakest in history.
Well, what you also touched on there, I think, is also a big factor in what is changing the landscape, as it were, is that at this point in history, I think we could all agree that we have more viewing options to us available than ever before.
Agree.
So many, and quality stuff. It isn't like there's just tons of crap being put out on the streaming services. There's some really, really great stuff, and there's only so many hours in the day. So I can see why things like the Oscars have become less and less popular, just because there aren't as many people going to the movies to see these things, and therefore, why would you get excited about seeing an award handed out to some guy that you've never heard of making a film that you've never even heard of? It just makes no sense. But
Should be able to stream the Oscars whenever we want instead of it being a live.
well, they actually do have it on streaming. I saw it on Hulu right now. I can
Oh,
watch
wow,
it. I
okay.
can watch it from Sunday if I wanted to. But
Okay.
even with that at my fingertips, I went, nah.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Well, at least you could fast forward through all the crap.
so, but from what as I thought about this more and more, I thought that maybe the solution would be to have more public interaction into this. But you really don't feel that way from what you're saying, Mark. And so I'm just curious as if I could wave a magic wand and say, Mark, you're in charge of the Oscars in 2022. What changes are you going to make this recover from the pit that it's in?
Ricky Gervais.
Good choice.
I mean, it comes down to one of the things that Ricky did when it came to the Globes was he made sure that the self-aggrandizing congratulatory moment could not be thoroughly enjoyed by the people trying to do it. He made it funny, and I think that if you want people to watch something, and this is the rule, award shows have not, the formula for award shows has not changed, nor has the formula for anything on television or movie theaters. If it's entertaining, people will go. Mm-hmm. If it is not entertaining, people won't. And yeah, there's some more, junk around in the internet to try to sort through and to try to figure out how to find the good stuff. But the good stuff is there. And I think that's I think that's ultimately the formula is make it, if you want people to watch, make it entertaining. If you don't care, have a private award show like it used to be.
I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, I also would have said Ricky Gervais. I mean, his work on the Golden Globes was so mind-numbingly funny because he didn't give a crap about what he said or who he said it about. And so many of the hosts of these things in the past, they have to serve so many different masters, and they have to find different ways to make it entertaining without offending the various parties involved. And Ricky Gervais didn't give a crap about that. He just went in and said what was on his mind, and whether or not they'll actually let him do another one, I hope they do, because that was funny as hell.
Well, I don't think he wants to. I think he's been saying he was done. But we're also talking about what the Grammys did a little bit with, was it Grammys with Bill Burr this year?
I didn't see them.
Well, here's a guy, the headlines the whole next day, completely offended. This group's offended, that group's offended. That's entertainment. So, I think that the shows are going to have to figure out how to maintain their integrity while, reaching for different audiences. And obviously the collaboration that Sean mentioned is critical. Matching people up that don't belong to be matched and having them do something great is incredible. And there are going to be a million more ideas as these shows try to figure out their path. But like all things, the Hall of Fame in baseball and everything else, which are privately voted on organizations, I think that when the context is right, they'll figure it out, and when it's not, they'll fail.
So going back to my original query, if you said Ricky Gervais, what else would you change about it? What about the show itself would be different in your eyes in order to make it appeal to the demographic that obviously, like, the one key demographic, the 18 to whatever 31 or whatever it is was at the lowest point ever for the Oscars this time. What would you think could attract that younger audience back to watching this thing that comes out of the pantheon of their parents?
Well, you are putting me on the spot on this.
I am.
And I think there are a lot of very smart people trying to figure out that very problem. I do think, though, that breaking the mold is important. I think that they got into some habits that really were not all that appealing. I mean, you were looking at hosts that were both careful and awkward, and then anything that smelled of controversy caused them to be removed. And There was a lot of junk that went along with the glamour and the glory of the show, rather than just trying to have a little fun. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer to your question, but I think the answer ultimately is obvious in some ways, where you've got to get fun people that are hosts. You've got to let them be them. You've got to you've got to have some fun with it, because I personally, my vote is not to just go ahead and sacrifice the integrity of these institutions. I'd rather have them be the kind of a thing where you can't watch them, like the technical awards on the Grammys and the Oscars.
Good point.
You can't watch them. They're not entertaining. Nobody would ever sit around and watch that unless they were highly interested in those technical categories. But
That's an excellent
But
point.
that Oscar means the world, or that Grammy means the world to those people. And who gives a crap if anybody from the public ever sees it? They've been recognized by their industry, and I like that.
That's a very good point. Missing the whole point of the awards is to recognize excellence, and whether or not that's entertaining to the public in general shouldn't really factor into it in a major way. But
It does. We know it does. We know that the studios pay billions of dollars a year to try to win the Oscar, because they know that increases the value of the product.
even just being nominated, I mean, wasn't it a few years ago they increased the number of films that get nominated just so that they could have more of their films advertised saying nominated for X number of Academy Awards?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there may be another position there, which was what they were being too exclusionary in the nominations.
Fair enough.
And that was my understanding, was that you may have 4 of the greatest movies ever, but you may have had a minority production, or you may have had this production or that production that was being excluded, and they needed to make a little bit of room. So maybe it's a little bit of both.
How about you, Sean? What do you think? What would you do different if you were given the reins?
Well, I kind of agree a little bit with Mark here. Like, it's got to be fun. I think we got to keep politics out of it. It seems like the last few years of the Oscars, especially, that there was so much controversy going on and politics involved. I don't know, people don't want to get involved in it sometimes, and it takes away the fun of the whole thing. It's like they got to figure out a way to keep it interesting. Now, you're talking about a new generation coming into watching this too, which has, not to bash the newer generation, but the attention spans are a lot different than when we grew up. And it's just, they need to have a better way of doing this. They got to make it feel more special, I think, to people that want to watch it.
But I will weigh in with one more thing, because it's a populist thing, which is Chadwick Boseman.
Okay.
Everybody loved Chadwick Boseman. Yes. I love Chadwick Boseman.
Absolutely.
Most people thought he should win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not necessarily, though, because they watched Anthony Hopkins in The Father, but because they liked Chadwick Boseman. And, I will tell you, I don't, and there have been votes I've strongly disagreed with in the past. And, Pulp Fiction losing to Forrest Gump to me was the
Ridiculous.
travesty.
Yeah.
Now, Forrest Gump was a great movie.
It was, but not as great as Pulp Fiction.
Not in my book. But again, it was from a populist standpoint, from an effects standpoint, Forrest Gump was incredible. And but Chadwick, he lost the vote to one of the greatest actors of all time. And I thought one of the greatest honors I've ever heard was the Boseman family saying he was not snubbed. Anthony Hopkins was great. But I don't think that the public should have voted on Chadwick Boseman. I don't think that that's what the Oscars was supposed to be about. And the performance by Anthony Hopkins was incredible, and everything Anthony Hopkins does was incredible. And if he was the best actor of the year, he had 100% right to win that award by the industry. Damn what the public thinks. And with that said, I wanted, like everybody else, Chadwick to win. So that just a two-cent throw out on populist versus industry.
Very, very, very interesting. You've given me a great deal to think about on this subject. Was there anything else you wanted to say about this, Sean?
No, I just, they need to make these award shows more special, I think, somewhere down the line. It's just, they're kind of boring to me. That's my opinion.
Okay, well, An interesting debate. Want to thank both of you for participating in that. I really enjoyed that. And I want to thank all of you out there for your continued support. And you can always send us feedback at acetalksmusic@gmail.com. And you can come check out our After Hours show on the patreon.com platform. It's Ace on Music After Hours there. And one last thing I wanted to say. We were batting around an idea for a future show. And I wanted to ask all of you for some input here. We were going to do a future show that was going to talk about the greatest opening lyrics of any song that you could think of. So send us an email with your favorite opening lines from a song, and we'll see about including it on that future show. In the meantime, take care of yourself and stay safe.